Misha here, and in this bag I have a gun that I just can't quit. I've had it, sold it, had it again, sold it again, and recently picked it up again. Not always the same gun, but, the model a couple of years ago during the whole COVID blah, blah, blah. Can you guess what it is? I will also say, looking back at just range footage throughout the year, while it hasn't had a main feature, it always gets a mag or two put through it. It comes with me out to the cabin frequently, partially because it is small, easy to do, partially because folks want to shoot it. It's a very famous gun, and partially because the ammo situation has gotten a lot better in recent years. Some may have guessed. If you know me, you know. Yep, we're going to talk about the FN PS90, the 5.7 cartridge today, and even, of course, the military P90. Just checking up on them, and shooting it a bit, and maybe just reiterating why I really do like this gun, and a lot of friends and family do too. However, why a lot of people maybe don't. Well, I'll point out its flaws. Also, it's been a big competition for this and the HK MP7, along with its 4.6mm cartridge. And both guns and cartridges are in NATO service, kind of either or you can pick. And while I think this is the best pick, as always, get into this holiday season, if you could, like, share, subscribe, support the channel any way you can. Commenting's great. There's also Patreon, if you'd like, or Super Thanks. Not a terribly formal video, but who doesn't like revisiting a favorite? And with that, why is it my favorite? And why am I able to shoot it more in 2025 than I was maybe in the years past? I'm actually going to move just a hair so I don't get it on my mat. It's got more oomph behind it than you'd think. One of the main purposes, attractions behind the P90 and PS90 is its cartridge. But it's also one of its Achilles heels. The 5.7x28, here's one loading. This is FN brand, 50-shot box. It is classified as a pistol round. This is a 27 grain hollow point. And the FN ammo was always pretty spendy, and for years there were not a ton of guns chambered for it. But in more recent times, that has changed on both fronts. Put my cartridge back in my box, because what we've been shooting isn't this, it's this stuff. Fiocchi. This is 40 grain, 150 count box. Essentially a Hornady type VMAX projectile. This stuff, while not inexpensive, is no more expensive than, say, 7.62x39, 5.45x39, even 223 and other cartridges. Still not as cheap as 9mm, of course. But being able to get this stuff in bulk in the last few years has really helped. And, of course, the cartridge, while 30 years old on the commercial market, and 40 on the military, it's gained some traction, and there are plenty of guns out there chambered for it now, certainly more so than the 4.6mm. So being able to get that means I'm able to shoot this, something I'm pretty appreciative of. Now, in the past, we could get the American Eagle branded stuff, the AE 5728A. Myself and I and other people have had trouble with that in this gun. But the Fiocchi, much to my pleasure, it runs fine and has done for a couple of years now in this. The cartridge has a lot to recommend it, and in the past it was hard to get and expensive, so some said, well, why not just make this in 9mm or 223? Well, you can't. This gun is based around the cartridge. In fact, that's one reason I love it. In fact, everything about this gun, from the feeding device, the sighting system, the overall layout, the internals, it's all a piece. When it was designed in the late 80s, it was all new stuff. And it was based around the 5.7 cartridge. So if you take the cartridge out, you literally take the heart out of the gun. And that's one of the many reasons I enjoy the military P90, which I was able to fire over 20 years ago at a place. And when the PS came out a couple of years later, I went and got one for the first time. And then I sold it. And then I got another one. And yeah, like I said earlier on, why is that happening? What's going on here? History and all that. Is it a success? Is it a failure? Yeah, let's talk about it. Go into some depth. Why not? After all, FN has discontinued the SCAR. I don't have a SCAR to show you, but I do have this critter. So, yeah, feel free to comment what you think below. And let's keep the MP7 versus P90 debate raging. Why not? It's fun. Let's see how well this Bullpup can do. Yeah, normally the limiting factor is the cost of the ammo. The story of the FN Project 1990 actually doesn't really begin with the Bullpup itself. In fact, the layout is one of the more conventional elements of the whole gun. It begins with the 5.7 cartridge. World War II was the peak of the submachine gun, most all being in 9mm, you understand. But as the intermediate cartridge, 7.62 by 39 a little bit, but really 223 later, 5.56 NATO, more so, and then 5.45 by 39 in Soviet Russia came along. The submachine gun just kind of fell out of favor. You don't see very many in the 1970s. The exceptions, the Uzi, which kind of predates it, is one of the last of that type. And then the MP5, which kind of kept the flame alive a little bit. But even then, very much special forces, counterterrorism, and police. The military's mostly, let's just go to a short 10, 12-inch barrel gun, firing our standard issue cartridge. Once 223 came around, 5.45, obviously 308, 7.62 NATO, not so good at that. One of many reasons why the whole concept was a little eh. But either way, submachine gun falling out of favor. Then in the 1980s, counterterrorism, a lot of communist insurgent groups, counter-revolutionaries in different areas, Latin America, and body armor was becoming more of a concern. So the idea of a very small diameter, high velocity, armor penetrating cartridge came about. And so work began at FN by Jean-Paul Denis on what would become the 5.7 cartridge. Next still really wasn't the Bullpup, at least in conjunction. It was the magazine here, or rather its very unique spiral feed system and lightweight and high capacity. The patent for this was filed in 1988 by René Prédicé, but he'd been working on it for a number of years, and it allows, for YouTube, these are dummy blank cartridges, for a very interesting feed path, capacity, lightweight, a lot of benefits, really with the only detraction being not especially fast loading, reloading, and you don't get a last round hold open. After a bit of practice, mag changes, they're not too shabby at all. Smoother than you might expect. Now, of course, FN knew they needed a firearm for this. In fact, they were looking at both pistols and carbines. But it really wasn't until NATO released some wants, needs, specifications around 1989, that this started to take firm shape. NATO was looking for 2 firearms for the new cartridge. One, a service-sized handgun sidearm, and then another, a compact carbine, a submachine gun. Obviously, the submachine gun would replace certain other carbines firing a little full power stuff or existing SMGs around, and the service pistol would replace some, but not all. This wasn't really meant to replace 9mm. It was more for PDWs. It was more for certain security elements, military police, vehicle drivers, air crews. It was always meant to be a specialized weapon, not mass issuance. So, two things. The carbine version needed to weigh 3 kilos or less. The pistol version, 1 kilo or less, but 700 grams would be better. So you're looking at, little over 2 pounds to 1.5 pounds there for the pistol, and under 7 pounds for sure for the carbine. Under 6 would be better. It also needed to be compact and handy to stow in cabs and cockpits and whatnot, and able to be readied and operated single-handed. Cool. It needed to have a capacity, both the pistol and the carbine, of at least 20 rounds, although, more is better. And it needed to outperform 9mm, have better range, accuracy, hit probability, terminal ballistics, and as you've already guessed, it needed to be able to penetrate body armor at distance, at range. So with all that in mind, FN was the first to submit an entry and application for this NATO spec PDW cartridge and carbine. The pistol would wait a bit. The so-called SS90, the original 5.7 by 28 round, it was submitted for patent application in 1989 and approved by 1991, at least in the USA. Europe could be a little different. And it's actually not what this fires here. And very easy to check your ammo count with these magazines. And last round. No failures at all year out of this gun. The original was a bit different. Same basic dimensions, but just slightly longer. It was a 23 grain bullet, and it was really interesting because while it had metal, it had a polymer core, and it was smoking. It went out at 2800 FPS. To put that in perspective, that's Mach 2.5. So it traveled at the speed of a high-performance jet fighter. To say it could penetrate body armor is an understatement. It absolutely could penetrate various standard vests at over 200 yards. Not bad. And it had the benefit of lower recoil impulse, quite a bit lower, frankly, at 30%, 33%, give or take. And it was lighter. The new cartridge was quite a bit lighter than 9mm, and kind of on par with a lot of other things. So you could carry more, handier, what have you. And this is when we first see the prototype of the original FN P90 Bullpup. They went with the Bullpup configuration as opposed to folding stock and all that to satisfy the single-handed requirement. They went with the ring sight to satisfy just the snap it up and shoot requirement. The magazine definitely gives the capacity wanted, and it comes in at the size and weight they wanted. Of course, this is the PS90, so it doesn't exactly apply, but the original P90, under 6 pounds, about 5.7, 5.8, depending on exact configuration, with an overall length a hair under 20 inches, with a 10.4-inch threaded barrel with flash hider. The flash hider will change a little bit over time. So we're nailing it. Now, just for what it's worth, the PS90, still pretty good. About 6 pounds unloaded. Again, depending on the version, rails can bump that up a little bit. And then with the extension on the barrel and flash hider, that comes out to 16 inches. Actually, the barrel part's more like 13 and a half, 14. Giving it an overall length of 26. Again, just for U.S. federal law, all that stuff. Meaning the overall length, is what it has to be. It's still very handy and light for what it is. It didn't ruin the gun, in my opinion. Also, to kind of satisfy ambidexterity, not something that NATO outright said it had to have, but it would be very nice. We have the safety selector here, the rotating style. We have ambi, non-reciprocating handles. We even have ambi iron backup sights, ambi mag catch, and the bottom eject with port door. That's very ambi too. Mine has the sling set up as a 2-point, just because I like it, but a lot of them will do a single point style. FN has done both over the years. We'll get to all that. They really did meet NATO's expectations or succeed them, and even though they did not submit a pistol early on, 1990, they did give the projectile and the Bullpup, the carbine, enough so that some prototypes even got some field testing in 1991 during Desert Storm, the first Gulf War. Thanks to that experience and just ongoing testing, there would be a major revision. As you know, the SS-90 was discontinued soon thereafter in favor of the SS-190. That was a somewhat more conventional projectile, but more stable, more reliable. It went from the 23 grain up to about a 31 grain projectile, and it had a steel penetrator with a lead soft core and then a jacket. Still very much armor piercing. They did shorten it by a little over 1/10 of an inch, mostly to do with feed reliability and whatnot. And the velocity did decrease down to about 2,400 FPS to 2,300 FPS, depending on the exact loading. So, darn it, we're down to closer to like Mach 2. So, the speed of an F4 Phantom. Yeah, it's still perfectly able to penetrate body armor, and in other ways just has better stability, better performance, especially against unarmored targets. The slight change in length of the cartridge required a slight change in the magazine, because this is all meant to go together. The cartridge, the mag, designed for each other. In fact, it was a complete clean sheet design. And of course, it required a little bit of rechambering, reworking of the gun itself, meaning that in 1993, essentially the full rate version of the P90 came out. You could consider the original cartridge and versions to be prototypes at that. Meaning that by 94 and 95, we actually see rate production and actual adoption and issuance of this on a certain level. But the pistol, it's taken a little longer for various reasons. One of it is priorities. Another is they're having some issues. They even try a version of this mag for the pistol, but eventually they just kind of go to the more conventional design. Finally, we first see what we know as the FN57. My speech says 7 because of how it's written with the capital N. Early in 1998. So they do get the pistol, and it's okay because NATO trials are still ongoing. In fact, because it's post-Cold War, the trials are still being set up but in the mid-90s, but priorities lessening. But then, of course, 9/11 happens, the global war on terror, and the need for, well, defensive guns for police and special forces that might need to penetrate body armor but still save on ammo and, go in there. The need arises again. So by 2002, NATO trials are active with the FN57 cartridge, FN P90, and to a lesser extent the FN57 pistol. And they finally have competition. There we go. From Heckler & Koch, Germany. HK submits the MP7 and its 4.6 by 30 millimeter small, very small diameter, high velocity, armor piercing round. So over about 18 months, the two go head to head in various environments. There's a board set up with mainly advisors and evaluators from the USA, the UK, Canada, France, and there are others there, but those are the main ones. And so they're trying to figure out which cartridge to go with and which carbine, what's it going to be as a new NATO standard. The need is there. Well, no, neither. Well, sort of. They do clearly say there's a winner, but it's FN. And they give several reasons. One, HK does not have a pistol available to fire 4.6 millimeter. That's not an immediate disqualifier because they're really focusing on the submachine gun size component at this time. But it would have been probably a good idea if they had a pistol ready to go. But by this point, the 5.7 pistol, while very young, is there. The good news is they're already on version 2 of the P90 Bullpup, so they worked out its major kinks. And, you know, the second generation of the 5.7 cartridge. And that was one of the reasons they cited it as a, quote, clearly superior choice. It was mature. The 4.6, it's young. They also point out that you can essentially use the same tooling and production line that was making 5.56 millimeter cartridges to make the 5.7. It's close enough. You can do it. It's kind of a baby 5.56 NATO if you think about it. The overall length of the FN round, about 40 millimeters, with that 28 millimeter, nearly 29 technically speaking, cartridge, is almost as long as the 5.6. So we're not getting rid of 5.6 or 7.62 NATO. They still have their role, but maybe this will let 9 millimeter, because both 4.6 and the 5.7 outperform 9 millimeter, not just against body armor, but weight, range, follow-up shots with that less felt recoil. So logistically, it makes a lot of sense, but that doesn't really count for a hill of beans if performance isn't there. Did the HK cartridge outperform the 5.7? Was there only reason for going with this logistical? No. They said both performed equally when it came to body armor penetration. But 5.7 performed better, over 25% better, against unarmored or soft targets. Probably because it is a thicker, wider cartridge. It makes sense, 4.6, very thin, armor there, but if not, if you're just shooting a soft target, I could see where the wounding potential maybe wouldn't be there or just pass through, what have you. So that's one thing. They also said that in environmental testing, the 5.7 was just more stable. Hot and dry, cold, damp, snow, ice. It just seemed to do better in the testing than the 4.6 mil, which just was a little bit more finicky. And also barrel life, firearms life, because of the very small velocity, small or high velocity of the HK round, it was cooking through barrels. The 5.7, while it's small caliber, high velocity, the barrel life was it was holding up better, thanks to them going from the SS90 to the SS190 round, from 2800 to less than 2400 FPS. It was just less wear and tear on the barrels. I mean, no one wants to be replacing barrels all the time. SIG, M7. So really, in every way, the two cartridges were equal, or FN was better. As far as, of course, the P90 versus the MP7, you can argue that, but what can't be argued is the P90 was a more mature design. and I really like it. Yeah, you might prefer the MP7, but FN, a known maker, very respectable. HK, they were doing better in the early 21st century, but we did a video earlier in the year looking at the Bundeswehr guns, the G36, and all that controversy. Keep in mind, they had gone through some turmoil, and then finally cost. FN could deliver these cheaper than HK could, at least projection-wise. So the NATO board recommended, by the end of 2003, go with this cartridge. And then, of course, the Germans protested.
Here.
No longer content just to protest on their own things, look at all the replacement of the G36 and all that crap. Yeah, they protested that, saying it was unfair. I mean, they had some points, I'm not going to lie. But the end result was nothing was picked. Essentially, they threw their hands up in the air and said, okay, fine. Each NATO country can pick the gun, pick the cartridge they want, whatever. This isn't a general issue frontline thing. This is a specialist thing. Why are we wasting our time? Let's get back to whatever it is we're doing. That's where things stayed with NATO. Even though the cartridge, the gun was made for them, and definitely some NATO members adopted it, not to mention all the police departments, and not to mention but that by this time, FN had already produced over 17,000 of the P90. You know, they could just pick, whatever. This would not change until 2021, when in February of that year, finally, NATO made the 5.7 cartridge a standard. However, 4.6 also squeezed in there. Essentially, they both became co-standards. But this is one reason amongst many that the cartridge and this gun here and all the others kind of has had a second life in the 2020s. And again, needs must and all that. And one reason it's been seen in limited numbers, but still there in things like the Ukrainian conflict and why it's still in production today. All right, we've talked about the general. I want to go inside at the table and talk about the individual components of this gun, how they were really designed around the mag, around the cartridge, why you can't really change it. I also want to talk about how, even though this is often said to be a direct blowback gun, it is, but it isn't. We'll get there. About the sighting system, how it's changed over the years, any other changes to the gun, how many have been made, that kind of thing. And, yes, we'll talk about the whole trigger pack stuff. It does thump you more than you'd think. Definitely shows you it's not just a 22. But there is no muzzle rise. Hot brass on my sandal. Normally on this channel, I don't focus much on ammunition. It's just not what I do. But the 5.7 28 cartridge is so important that we have to. And as I already mentioned, the original was the SS 90, 23 grain, what have you. The SS 190 was a 31 grain. And that's still kind of the current military round today. It's also classified by the USATF as armor piercing, and while it's not strictly speaking illegal for a civilian to own, it's not sold to civilians by FN, and there's a lot of ifs and ands, so we won't get into it. If you have some, you're not breaking the law, at least not federally, but you're not really supposed to buy or sell it, if that makes sense. I'm simplifying, I know. From there, the line definitely expanded out. For example, the SS 191, later renamed L191, is a tracer round. Essentially the same ballistics and everything as 190, it just had tracer, also usually had a red, sometimes a red and black tip. It too is classed as armor piercing. Then you get the SS 192, which is the introduction to hollow points, going down to 28 grain like this box might say 27 grain. Anyway, a little bit lighter. The SS-192 is not classed as armor piercing because of how the tip will flower out and stop at a certain depth. So technically not restricted as such, but we'll get to the details in a bit. After that, we get a subsonic round, the SS-193, later SB-193 renamed. And it's kind of similar to this. This is a 40 grain bullet. The subsonic is a 55 grain, so as much as a M193 heavy, and that keeps it going. It has a white tip, and it is restricted by FN to military and law enforcement. And then we have the SS-194, later renamed T-194, which is kind of going back to a 28 grain, and it was intended for training. So essentially a less penetrating version for training there. We can think of it as a second generation of cartridges started to see the market in 2004, 2005, beginning with the SS-195 lead-free LF, still a 28 grain projectile and not considered armor piercing by the ATF, and generally one of the rounds available to the civilian market. Then we would get the SR for sporting round 196 short time later, and it would have I believe a red tip, and as far as I know it was made by Fiocchi for FN. It had this bullet weight here of 40 grains, and it was under 2,000 FPS out of the PS90, so around 18, 19 I usually see, give or take. It does not seem to have hung on for that long. It was replaced by the SR-197, which colors are hard for me. I believe it was either green or blue tip. It bumped the terminal ballistics up a bit, still a 40 grain bullet, about 100 FPS muzzle velocity, so 1900, 1950 or so, depending on the exact barrel length. Also maybe a Fiocchi, and that's available today. It's not considered armor piercing. It's considered a sporting round, and so available. And then finally there's the SS-198 LF, and that's kind of important because we come across it quite a bit. And what you see is, the 92 is replaced by the 95. The 95 is out there, but the 98 is kind of the souped up version of it, another 100 FPS faster. It has the 28 grain, 27 grain bullet. And it's restricted to law enforcement, but for reasons, the SS-198 LF, just, it's out there more. You see it more often. So unless you happen to get some of the SS-190 or something similar, or a specialty round some weird way, the 198 is probably the restricted round you'll come across most often. It's on websites and stuff. Truth be told, I've had good luck out of the 196. The 197's pretty good with the 40 grain bullet. 195 you can get. So those are the FN options, with a lot of them being made in some level by other companies like the VMAX Bullet. You've got the Fiocchi doing them, sometimes with FN casings, And then you have the American Eagle, which is related. You have Federal, which does a lot of distributing. Different levels of sometimes the same ammo, different brand name, or sometimes similar ammo, but a little bit separated. You know what I mean? It's just the ammo's out there, which is good, and most of it I do like. And it's definitely more umphy than a 22, and just more reliable, in my opinion, compared to a rimfire, even a rimfire Magnum type, and I think that's one of its big assets. Also, very light recoiling, easy to load, lightweight, so you can load a lot on your body. I think it has a lot to recommend, even if you aren't able to get the full AP rounds. And to be fair, who among us is shooting at people wearing vests? Don't answer that question, please. Let's move on before we all get canceled here. I was wondering if that was going to happen. Small anecdote, I will say my brother was in law enforcement for over 30 years, and when the 5.7 ammo came out, police were not fond of it. They had just started wearing vests, and then to hear that there's a round on the street that could penetrate. Look, when you're an officer out there potentially in danger, I'm very sympathetic to that. I'm not really taking a stance because I can see both sides, but I can see both sides on that situation. And to be fair, most attackers going at us aren't wearing body armor, at least professional grade. And if we're just range blanking, it's honestly just a waste of very expensive bullets. Because even if you find some of the restricted rounds, they cost a great deal. But this stuff's pretty good for what it is, and it has some pretty cool properties. So I suggest checking out the Fiocchi, and you can try the American Eagle if you like too. And again, that new rule, only doing this with boots or shoes on. And those are fun. The product line for the Select Fire P90 started to expand in 99, 2000. And as I've said in many videos, I first got to handle and fire one of the Select Fire guns as a post sample around, I guess it was 2003 or so. And even then, we were told, hey, there's going to be a civilian version coming out. And finally, in 2005, the earliest PS90s did hit the market. And I picked my first one up in 2006. And it was a little different from this version. Ironically, originally, the black stock version was meant to be the special limited edition, with the green stock, the standard PS90. Also, magazine capacity. The black would have the full, the green would have the reduced, the 30 round. These at that time had the original polymer housing ring sight. But then they would go to the updated aluminum alloy ring sight, and black would kind of take over. And we would go from the original PS90 to the USG version here. And then the product line would expand from that point. But that said, by the 2010s, 2011, 2012, 2013, rails were everywhere. The tri-rail or the standard just single rail were around, and eventually they would just stop producing the USGI version, the integrated ring sight version. Now, it's all modular. You can still switch around if you can find the ring sight, and a friend of mine did just that. He got a railed standard version back when CD&N had them cheap, and found a ring sight and put it on. You could do that. These days, that's getting harder to do. In fact, FN really has simplified both the Select Fire P90 and the civilian PS90 lines to the point that really today, it's just the standard version, just the integrated rail. Side rails can still be optional, but an integrated from the factory sight doesn't seem to be the norm. But at least they're still making them today. I do not know how many P90s have been made. FN's never released numbers. If they were already up to 17,000 over 20 years ago, and production continues, it's got to be over 100,000. And I say that because for the PS90, just based on serials, we're about 170,000 serial range-ish. And we started off around at least 30,000. Either way, estimates are 140,000 PS90s have been made globally. Now, some will go to law enforcement and other training elements, so they weren't released here on the U.S. market. But if they've made that many semi-autos, surely they've made the same or more Select Fire. Are there any other differences? What about other updates to modernity, military use, all that, and any other details worth sharing? Why do I keep buying and selling this gun? Well, my original one I bought, and they were pretty spendy back then, and I was still in grad school and then getting out of college, and then I got married. The value was there. I could get moving it, and the cartridges were just expensive, and the new had kind of worn off, and it was the green stock version with the polymer housing up here. SBRs really weren't available. It seemed like a good thing, and I don't really regret it. I picked up my first USGI version, my second one overall, when CD&N had them on a deep, deep sale. Like, think under $1,000 new. And I really did like it. It was just like this one, black alloy. And the mags have always been surprisingly gettable, thankfully. So that's nice, even though they still ship them with the little limiter block in there usually. And I kept it for quite a while, but then that ammo thing ate at me for a bit. And I had a 5.7 pistol. It's not a bad gun, but doesn't super impress me either. I sold it, so the PS90 was the only gun in the chambering. We were starting to move, and then actually, I think it was Jay's father-in-law liked the gun. Either way, someone wanted my PS90 from CD&N, and the price had risen again, probably a Sandy Hook or similar timing. It was a good time to get rid of it, make a decent amount of money going from new to used. It seemed right, and again, I don't regret it. And I thought that would be it, and for many years it was. But then during 2020 to 2022, the height of buying for all kinds of reasons, not just panic buying, but just people who are at home bored, a lot of guns were offered on trade towards mainly Swiss guns, but other things I had too. A couple of Valmets were, a couple of AKs. I had Mitchell's, a Chinese Norinco side folder, the FS 2000 you've seen in various videos. And alongside it, this gun here. And I thought, okay, I'd already been wanting to get another PS90. The desire had hit me again. And I realized something. Yes, the ammo had become better to get with the Fiocchi and others. The price had stayed the same or even gone down where a lot of other ammo had not. B, I realized something. There is a benefit to only having one gun to fire one cartridge. You don't go through it near as fast. In fact, the box that I've got open has made it through several range trips without getting shot through. Kind of reminds me of the old days when I first just had one or two AKs. The Sub-6039 lasted a lot longer. And it's true. So what I did is I just decided, okay, I'll just buy a decent quantity of ammo, nothing crazy, 1,000 rounds. And that'll probably last me for a while. Because it is, at the end of the day, mostly just a novelty for fun. But, hey. And so when this came in on trade, I thought, I'm going to keep it. Now, I had thought about getting one of the standard versions. In fact, had ordered one new in at the store, and it came in. But I prefer the old school look with the housing. It's also a little lighter. I would have probably been okay keeping the railed version, the current production. But when this one came available, including with its earlier style trigger pack, now, this was the right fit for me. It was like my USGI I had before, my favorite version. And, as you've seen, it's very reliable, even with the Fiocchi ammo. This is one of the few guns I do own a brass catcher for. And, well, it does make sense. That said, I don't know that I know anyone that reloads 5.7. When FN introduced the 5.7 cartridge to the market 20 years ago, it was really meant for the 5.7 pistol and the P90, PS90. They really weren't thinking about expanding. But early on, you would see some things like the AR-57, which was an AR-15 upper. You could drop on to a lower and use the magwells and ejection. It's pretty easy. Also, Kel-Tec, not really surprisingly, kind of got in on the game a little bit earlier than everyone else with things like the P50 and R50. But with the availability of the Fiocchi and American Eagle ammo, and with NATO adoption, there's just been a whole host of guns. For one, Kel-Tec's kept on. They've done the PR-57, or at least they're in the process of it. CMMG has kind of went with the 57 in a big way. Several different variants there that they've done. Rather famously, Ruger has gotten into the game with the Ruger 57. You had some kind of lower-end companies, let's say entry-level, like Diamondback, Masterpiece Arms, which I want to be honest, I didn't know they were still around, but cool. You even have some Turkish imports purportedly chambered for 5.7. But most of the makers do seem to be American companies. Smith & Wesson, I believe, has done a little bit with it. Again, there's a bunch of them you can Google and see, but it's cool to see the cartridge catching on. Is it niche? Is it specialized? Yeah, it is. Is it essentially a weaker 5.56? Well, in the versions we have, yeah. Is it a 22 Magnum that costs a lot more? Sure. But it is reliable, it's clean burning, and it's accurate and fun. So, hey, more the merrier for companies chambering guns for it. It's certainly getting much more notoriety here than 4.6 millimeter HK. And because of it, that's probably why the PS90 is still around, and even the 5.7 has kind of received a Generation 2, and FN's doing that now, although they don't seem to be in stock all that frequently. The PS90 is still in production today, although it's often out of stock. It doesn't like FN's sending over a ton of them. But when you consider the FS2000, long out of production and availability, and now the SCAR, out of production and availability, who knows how long FN will still offer this version to us. Although, to be fair, military-wise, even though production hasn't been just huge, vast issuance, it's more successful than those designs. Still, imports, they're one of those things. Even if I did get rid of it, this exact version, it's long gone. It's over a decade out of production. So I don't foresee me getting rid of it anytime soon. And it's a crowd pleaser. And besides, I've still got plenty of ammo left, so can't get rid of it till you shoot through that over the next few years, right?
Here we go. That's cool.
Nothing new under the sun, I know. Just having fun. I thought we would break her apart and talk about the mechanics and what variation exists. This does look very, very similar to the gun I picked up in 2006, which was technically a Generation 1. Again, it was in green with the earliest style of the ring sight. Quality and manufacture, very high. Yeah, I remember before I was able to get my hands on a PS90, a buddy had handled one. He lived in Florida, so a little more current than Arkansas, especially 20 some odd years ago. And he picked one up and said, yeah, it's a weird caliber. Keep in mind, 5.7, the bullets were not exactly easy to get in 2005, early 2006. He said, the quality is really good. Of course, we didn't know about the mags. And frankly, that's our first step. If we want to disassemble it, is to pop our mag out. We have to do that. And that's because our main button is right here. Deceptively simple, but well-designed gun. And we press in here to take her apart, and it's like many other bullpups. If you do a 2-point seam like I like, you definitely want one with a quick release buckle.
I like that.
And so this is our main housing. Technically, this is the receiver under U.S. law. Mentioned the barrel. It's actually a little over 16 inches. I think 16.3 or 4. Permanently affixed muzzle device. I believe the rifle portion's about 14.5. Going back here, chrome lined, cold hammer forged. 1 in 9 twist is the standard. And we have the built-in fixed notch irons. And then the modular sight here. This is the ring sight. This you can consider kind of second generation. And this version, this is the MC1080, was designed specifically for the PS90 and P90. It's sometimes called the USGI or US Government or the Secret Service version. And it's pretty similar to the original one, like was on my first generation gun. The initial optic the gun launched with was the ring sight HC 1462. Basic shape of this, it was a polymer housing. It had a white kind of T-post reticle inside, and it had tritium and a fiber optic collector to bring in light. So, pretty good, but some found the white post to be harder to use, especially it would wash out. Others did not like that it was the polymer housing. So with this MC1080 here, went to the slightly tougher alloy housing. The black T still has tritium. I believe they did rework the fiber optic collector a bit, but I could be wrong on that. As you can imagine, optics are not my strong suit, but it is a very interesting optic. Even I've picked that up over the years. In fact, whenever I let someone who hasn't fired this in a while but did in the past pick one up and shoot it, they remember this optic, because once you kind of get the trick of it, it is very quick, very intuitive, and the less you think about it, frankly, the better it works for you. So after the second style here, there was a third called the MC1080 Electronic, or Electro. And that replaced the tritium, which, is dead in this one, as it would be in any of them now, with a CR2023 battery, a little coin battery, so that you can adjust it and have more flexibility. It's just a more modernized sight. Of course, with the military guns as early as 99, 2000, rails were a thing, and with the civilian guns a decade or so later, you started to see the quote-unquote PS90 standard replace this, and it's all a modular block. Like, I could easily put the top rail mount in here if I wanted, and screw it, and vice versa. So they are reverse compatible, backwards compatible, all that. And it seems like the version here disappeared by less than, well, at least a decade ago, less than 15 years. Just depends. And of course, different contracts, different things, but I'm not even sure if Insight's still making these and still around. How do you like the sight?
The sight, I mean, for me, it was a very fast acquisition. Like you said, I didn't try to look for it. I just tried to let it sit natural, just a natural aiming, and it just fell right into place. I love prism sights to begin with, just because there's not a lot to do with it. And I can shoot both eyes open with it and not a problem.
I wish I could tell you personally more about the sight, but it is quite neat for what it was. That said, the modern rail version, you get the pick rail, and it even does give you an adjustable iron below it, which is probably pretty great. Still, though, because of the receiver and mag system, anything you mount here is going to be pretty high up. So a lot of folks do their best to get a low pick rail mount, often going to an aftermarket over the factory one, because even I can recognize that it's pretty tall. Next up, let's get our bolt group out. Here it is. Kind of move things on me a bit. Dual recoil spring. Nutch in the back there. That has actually a pretty important role. We have a very strong firing pin spring. dual guide rods. Pretty good system. Now, as I said earlier, this is often classed as a blowback gun, and that's mostly true. These interface here, and of course, this comes back and cycles in, and that's that. But you'll notice that little bit of give. And one thing that I always, when I first got my first gun, I thought it was sloppy fit, but it's not. This barrel has just a bit of movement, a quarter inch, even less, a couple of millimeters. Also has a little bit of give, a little bit of flex. That little bit of recoil back provides just the faintest amount of delayed blowback. Just a tiny amount to hold chamber pressures for a fraction of a second, both to give the bullet a little extra time to exit before opening up, and, you know, a little bit of safety for blowing out. It also means that when it does eject, it doesn't just come out with just a boatload of force. It ejects very positively, but while the cartridges are hot, they just fall out. Dust cover. And as I learned with my early one, do not shut your dust cover, this little plastic piece here, if your bolt is hot. It will melt it. Only cosmetically, as far as I know, but it will do it. Pro tip there. So, what else? Alrighty. I always like to give a few rounds there regardless. These are just fun. They really are. I even like the safety placement.
The safety placement is nice.
Yeah. Just convenient and practical, ambidextrous. The stock itself is one modular piece, and typically in black these days, green, there may be other colors, but they're not interchangeable with P90 stocks, just so that they can't be easily made into unregistered automatics, of course. So you only have a 1-2 position selector. Of course, you also have the continual trigger pull systems too. You know, they will configure these to whatever the company and contractor wants. But then we have this pretty thin, pretty hard, but still rubber butt plate. It's really not there for recoil management because it's very light. It's more rubbered just so it will stay on your shoulder even in all-weather situations. And under it is probably the most famous difference between early and late PS90s. Again, why cutie buckles are nice. And the butt plate just slips up. Now, I pointed out that nubbin in our bolt here. When that's in the gun, it actually goes right in here and keeps your plate pinned in. So it's only coming off if you have your bolt out. So cool. And just for extra surety, with our trigger pack, it doesn't just slide out willy-nilly. There's actually a tab here. You press up on it, and then it pulls out that way. So it's all secure. And not bad at rapid. Not bad at all. Even little brass flinging up on the tripod there. Here it is. Here's the one of mine. So the little piece comes down, this little locking tab. You can tell it's a military gun. This is my pack here. Now this is the quote-unquote trigger area where you hinge back on to release the hammer. And this is our sear. Notice how it catches that and then lets it go forward. Here lies much truth, many rumors, many innuendos, much speculation, and frankly, a lot of outright falsities and perhaps lies and even hoaxes. Generations 1 through 4, eras I'm sure you know, 1 through 3, which are legit. Gen 1, what's my original gun had, it's a black pack with typically a black hammer and black or green sear port up front. There's some rumors of other colors. I've even read of like orange hammers and stuff, but yeah. That would have been, based on best known serials, the first, 10,000 or so guns. 30s and really low 40s in the range. So 2005, 2006. The Gen 2 pack, the only main difference, at least initially, it went from a black body pack to a gray. And while there's no official statement why, I think it's pretty obvious that it made it easier at the FN factory to go, that's a P90 automatic pack, and that's a PS90 semi-automatic pack. So make the whole thing gray, easier to do. Full disclosure, a P90 pack will not fit in a PS90, and even the Gen 1 black PS90 packs could not go automatic unless you illegally tampered with them or modified them legally if you had a license. But yeah, just full disclosure there, so don't do that. Later on, it seems like the sear went maybe from the greenish color to a gray, but that just happened in Gen 2 and doesn't really seem to signify much, if anything, maybe just to give it all kind of an all gray finish. I don't know. Really don't. Now, some people assert that the Generation 1s are just physically easier to convert. Maybe. I don't think so, though. I think it really was just a change in the color of the plastic. Because I don't remember my Gen 1 pack being different. But maybe there's some internal things. Look, I don't go setting about trying to make things what they shouldn't be. So I don't know. Doesn't matter if one's slightly easier or not. That's kind of the internet rumors, though, I believe. And Gen 2 would last into the 60,000 serials, so for a little bit of time. And it seems like there was intermittent switchover with Gen 3 for a bit, so you got a gun in maybe around 2010 or so. It could have either one. Gen 3, though, is significant. First off, it's pretty much an all-gray pack, although I think some have reported white hammers. Either way, it's just a homogeneous pack. And it is different. The sear and the notch it works with changes, and correspondingly the hammer does. Basically what happens, it's still all here, but instead of releasing it and keeping it there, the hammer actually springs up further to about there and then stops. So not all the way. There's still a catch. It can't go, into battery. They just changed the area a bit. And that's the Gen 3. That's the majority of production. As I said earlier, they've made 140,000 or so, at least based on serials that we know of. And at least 100,000 are the Gen 3 style, with Gen 1 and Gen 2, the first 35,000-ish. So that's the known thing. What about Gen 4? Gen 4, they removed the auto sear component at all and made it just took all this stuff out, making it harder to make into a, select fire gun. The ATF mandated it, FN complied. There you go. Right? No. It seems to be fake. Yep, more fake news, guys. There are a handful of photos online purporting to be Gen 4s. The problem is the provenance is uncertain. They're not factory photos. We don't know. They could very well be a hoax or an aberration, a test, or sometimes I think they could just be FNFS 2000 Gen 2 trigger packs that are either mistaken for or mocked up to look like PS90s, because those don't have the front part. The safety position, to me, is just very intuitive. And for what it is, Bullpup trigger, it's at least crisp and predictable. I'll take that over mushy and meh What I'm trying to say is it's definitely better than the original Trevor. Just in case you're wondering, no, you can't put the bolt in upside down. It's keyed where it only goes one way. Look, I love the internet. Being disabled growing up, when it came along, it was a godsend. It really was. I've been interneting longer than a lot. But you have to trust but verify. Anything you come across online, unless it's an official source, even then, these days, who knows? People troll, people play hoaxes, people make mistakes, pictures get misattributed, captions get removed. Yeah, trust but verify, and with a lot of things like this, it's absolutely the case. But those are really about the only changes to the design, mostly just to do with the trigger pack system and sights and stock coloration. In military parlance, they did release versions with different lasers built in. Civilians, not really. You just got the rail or tri-rail. There's also integrally suppressed versions for military users. For the civilian, no. In fact, unless I'm wrong, and I could be, I don't believe FN has ever released a factory SBR PS90 semi-automatic. Be really cool if they did, though, because I'd like to get the correct barrel and take advantage of the tax stamp situation. It is a really fun gun and unique. This is actually a shroud over the barrel because without the ported brake, it is under 16 inches. You can see the pin there. So you have to have it on to get it out to 16, which I'm glad they did. Kind of reminds me of the good old Daewoo K1A1, making it as short as they can, legally speaking. For those who don't know, in the U.S., since the very early 80s, 16 inches is the minimum barrel length for a rifle, 18 shotgun. It used to be 18 rifle too, but they changed it. And overall length has to be no less than 26 inches. And that is with stock deployed. Of course, with the Bullpup, you don't have a moving stock, so it doesn't matter. Doesn't count it otherwise. But one other little benefit of this extension and shroud, it does keep it from getting hot quickly. It does actually act as a bit of a barrel cover and protector, and it is threaded underneath. So I've thought about, if I don't ever find an FN 10.4 barrel, I could just lob this existing one down because there should still be threads there the way it goes on coming back to here. We'll see. When it comes to accessories, for the magazines, I very, very much recommend getting the FNH mags. Years ago, a Korean company started, I think under the ATI brand name, but a Korean company started making copies of these mags, and they look very similar. And at first they work very similar, but what I've found, the springs in them take a set much faster and lose power much faster. I've just found that the copy mags just don't have the longevity that the FN factory mags do, and the FN mags are not super expensive or hard to find. However, there are some things that definitely are. My sling arrangement here you've seen me mess with. I like this one. I believe it's a Urban ERT sling, if memory serves. I bought it a long time ago. Hey, you try remembering the names of things when you can't see labels on them all the time. I've had it a long time. I love having slings on my guns, as you know, especially ones that I shoot frequently. But the FN factory slings, for one thing, have always been kind of hard to find. And for another, they use some weird system to kind of clip on the barrel. They haven't made them in a while, and they were always expensive, and now they're ludicrous. I'm not paying several $100s for a less than great sling. I mean, the factory slings are pretty meh. I think a lot of people used the single point sling loop in the back and did their own sling thing. And this can be converted to a single point makeup very well. So I feel like it's the best of both worlds. And again, the setup was made for this gun, even if it's aftermarket. I like wide slings and what have you. This is in the, of course, 2-point mode, but even though I don't often like one-size-fits-all or convertible things all the time, I kind of like purpose-built. I've always liked this brand. I've had it on several of my guns over the years, and it's quite easy to convert to single point. And there you go. Of course, there are multiple ways to do it. I could take out the extension. I could remove this back piece entirely if I wanted to. And of course, it's cinched up pretty tight here. It's finally getting cool out. But honestly, it's a better sling than the FN and costs a heck of a lot less. Nice thing about the ejection system, you don't have to worry about hitting your camera guy. Although in the summertime, dropping a hot shell down your pants has happened to me and will happen to you. Another area I don't have factory original accessory gear for, mag pouches. The factory mag pouch, again, they didn't release very many of them over here, and they have always been expensive, ridiculously so. So, thanks, but no thanks. Just find an aftermarket Blackhawk or whoever similar. Now, you will need a pouch pretty much made for this gun because of the weird shape, the length, and the bulk of the mag. I would advise trying to get it. And since the rounds are exposed and coming out, you do want something that covers this, otherwise things can slip out. Again, YouTube, for your sake, these are dummy rounds. So I can't recommend the FN factory stuff there. It's one of the few times it's just, the money's not worth it, and it's not commonly what most military users field anyway. They kind of go their own route. Not bad extension in 2-point mode. It's definitely the way I prefer it. When the PS90 came out, a lot of us did worry about the magazine. This is a very much proprietary and unique mag. And FN, they could really charge what they wanted. I mean, it's all plastic except for the spring, but it is high quality. Luckily, even since I bought my first one back in 2006, the mags have been reasonably priced, and over the years, they've only gotten better. And for different capacities, say at the 10 round, they keep the same body length, which they kind of have to work properly in the receiver and lock here. They just put in a extended base plate unit. So that's pretty good. And I'll be honest with you, some of my mags are probably almost 20 years old, and I only have 5. I have 2 pouches here, 2 each, and then I keep 1 in the firearm itself. And I've never had an FN mag go bad on me. But as I said, I have had the Korean knockoffs, I think they're ATI brand, lose oomph after a while. Basically, the spring just no longer can force the rollers up and work properly. They're also very easy to disassemble for maintenance, just as the whole firearm is. How do you feel about the forearm where your offhand goes?
I've got big hands and got a big body, and so those first couple shots were a little odd with it, but it kind of, once you have it there, I mean, for lack of better terms, you're cradling it. You're not really holding it. It's just sits kind of in the hand.
And of course, you can always shoot it one-handed if you need to.
Yeah, I mean, my hands are big. My knuckles kind of grab on it, but it's light enough, and with the 5.7, there's virtually no recoil, and so, I mean, I could probably shoot this thing fully extended. Obviously, wouldn't be able to use the sight with it, and would be able to do okay. And so,
You know, everyone loves the Scar, and they were sad when the Scar was discontinued. Me, myself, and I have been, am, and will be a PS90 fan, and I'm glad that it's got some legs to it. I mean, it's already stuck around for 30 years, and it fills a particularly good niche. I'm not saying I wouldn't buy the semi-automatic MP7, which would be the SP7, if we get the 4.6 mil ammo. What I'm saying is, I think even if those come around, I'll still prefer the PS90 and the 5.7 cartridge. And as the NATO test kind of revealed, when you're not going up against body armor or using AP ammo, 5.7 is just a more practical round than 4.6. 4.6 is a little over-specialized for armor penetration, whereas 5.7 can definitely do it, but in other ways it just acts like a miniature 5.56 NATO 223. As you can see, quite reliable. Even with the Fiocchi. Back here where we started on this fine late autumn day. Hope you enjoyed this look back at the P90, PS90, and I'd love to really know your opinions. I didn't really have a video planned. It's a gun I like, and I realized I had several shooting clips spread out. Why not use them? And it is reliable. I don't think we've ever had a failure out of this one. Then again, I don't think I've tried American Eagle in this particular gun itself, Bullpup itself. In the past I had, and that's the only time I maybe had a little bit of failure. And I know Jay had some issues out of his PS90. He had a standard version. But my only thing is I would like the SBR, as I mentioned. I need to find the FN 10.4 barrel. I don't want to put a US CMMG or similar barrel in it because, shoot, the FN Cold Hammer Forge Chromeline barrel is just part of the attraction. So that's really my only complaint with the PS90 is just the sticky addiness. But with the upcoming changes to the whole tax stamp stuff in 2026, I may go ahead and file for it and just have it, and then you can always just cut this down. We'll see. I don't know what I'm going to do yet, but I would like to because in its sub 20-inch version overall, it's a handy, powerful, slim, trim little package that still looks very space gun today, even though it's coming up on 40 years old. Let me know what you think, and if you own one. Maybe you own an MP7. I do not. If HK comes out with the semi-automatic version, I would consider it, but who knows. As always, if you could, please do like, share, and subscribe. Like to help the channel. Well, you know the dealio. Check out the link to Patreon, or you can do a super thanks right here on YouTube. Hope everyone's having a good holiday season. Best wishes from us all. This is Misha. Catch you very soon next time.